do?
Why don't we just wait here for a little while? See what happens.
Okay, let's get this out of the way. Childs is the thing. And not because you can't see his breath or the glint in his eye. You totally can see his breath, it's just the light is behind him, and the director of photography only did the eye glimmer clue in the blood test scene. So maybe it's the gasoline in the J&B whiskey bottle, maybe MacReady tricked him into sharing saliva. Really, Childs is just wearing a different coat. But John Carpenter wants to keep us guessing, the same way Christopher Nolan would later with the spinning top. The reality is, once you realize what this movie is really about, regardless of who is the assimilated entity in this moment, it's the other one who's the monster. I'm Erik Voss, and this is The Deep Dive, a channel that dives deep into films we love. John Carpenter's 1982 The Thing is one of the best films about paranoia, a film that inspired Quentin Tarantino to essentially recreate it with The Hateful Eight, including the star of the film. And it's a story that inspired social deduction games like Among Us, Werewolf, Mafia, Resistance. We love these games because we know deep down that it's more fun to be the nefarious entity corrupting the others, to blend in as the world burns, and to just sit back as the supposed heroes make fools of themselves. The Thing has been analyzed endlessly to try to decode its exact infection timeline and to figure out what's really going on in the final scene. There was an amazing Reddit post from 2017 that broke it down. YouTubers like Heavy Spoilers have made amazing videos about the film, but here in this analysis on The Deep Dive, I will take you back through this masterpiece film, moment by moment, for every clue, every easy to miss detail, every hidden character motivation, so that I can try to leave you with a new way to look at this story. Childs, we're all pretty certain, is assimilated in the final shot, but there's another reason MacReady laughs here, and we're gonna learn why the alien doesn't want to assimilate him. So we open in space as a flying saucer zips toward Earth's south pole. Based on the tilt of the planet with Antarctica facing the sunlight, this would be during the summertime in the southern hemisphere, but the humans later confirm it's the start of winter. But we also learn that this craft landed here in the ancient past, like Norris suspects 100,000 years, and Norris even said so when he was technically assimilated. Universal films would normally open with the planet from space and its classic logo, but the studio forewent that to avoid any confusion. Actually, this flying saucer was built practically with 144 lights that actually light up. Now nowadays this shot would probably be done with VFX, but like everything in this movie is practical. The title, John Carpenter's The Thing, burns through the screen, as the only way to be sure that an assimilated individual is neutralized is to burn it. This effect was made using an animation cell with the words The Thing written on it, placed behind a smoke-filled fish tank, which was covered with a plastic garbage bag that they then lit on fire. This burning effect was actually a callback to the original title of the 1951 Howard Hawks' The Thing from Another World, an adaptation of the 1938 novella Who Goes There by John W. Campbell under the pen name Don A. Stewart. The 1951 film is a similar scenario but includes female characters, but this 1982 script, written by Bill Lancaster, son of Burt Lancaster, is more faithful to the all-male 1938 novella, which includes character names like MacReady, Commander Gary, Norris, Benning, Dr. Copper, and Blair, and plot points like using copper wire to test blood. And an all-male cast makes this 1982 film a more appropriate story for what they're trying to do here. As the 1951 film was a metaphor for Cold War fears of communist assimilation, the 1982 version as a story about all men fearing an invisible evil and taking blood tests, all set in the early 80s. Yeah, Carpenter's The Thing works as a metaphor for the AIDS epidemic. Now, if you go into this movie knowing nothing about the plot, it has one of the wildest intros ever. A Norwegian helicopter over a frozen Antarctic tundra firing on the most adorable dog you've ever seen. It's just such a perplexing mystery box to open a movie with. From the alien in space to the alien as a dog, we open this movie from the eyes of the Thing itself. And a case can be made that the Thing is the protagonist of the story. I cannot recommend enough the 2010 short story called The Things by Peter Watts, an award-winning retelling of the events of this film from the perspective of the alien, and casting it in a sympathetic light. Like, it will completely change the way you see the Thing, not as a human survival story, but as the story of an alien outsider simply trying to bring communion and shared understanding to a world of hostile, cancerous loners. Watts writes how the entity considers mankind with its wearing of clothes layers as, quote, an offense against creation itself, and ponders, quote, what kind of a world rejects communion? It's a valid question to ask. Now, the dog we see for the first act of this movie was a half-wolf, half-Malamute breed named Jed, but actually this dog in the snow in the opening scene, according to Carpenter's commentary, was another dog they painted to look like Jed, because Jed, such a good actor, he's a little diva, he doesn't want to run around in the snow. During all this, we hear Ennio Morricone's score, which compared to his iconic work for the spaghetti westerns that he was best known for, here is really just a simple, chilling synth score, something closer to what John Carpenter himself scored for horror films like Halloween. Actually, unused portions of Morricone's score for this film would later be repurposed by him and by Quentin Tarantino for The Hateful Eight. Now, the events of the 2011 film The Thing serve as a prequel that lead right up to this chase of the dog, but for this video analysis, we will be mostly looking at the 1982 film alone as it was conceived and intended, because I believe that's how films should be seen, and not how future titles retroactively recharacterize what happens in them. So then we cut to the American station. Inside, we see Blair and Doc playing ping pong, Fuchs and Gary reading, Palmer fiddling with the pinball machine, and Windows playing the guitar. But then we cut to MacReady stuffing his fist in an ice bucket in Antarctica, so much for keeping warm. Yeah, it just shows that this guy doesn't mind the cold one bit. He often walks around outside without any kind of headgear. He likes that frost getting in his whiskers. But the ice here is for his drink, J&B Rare Blend Whiskey, a bottle that returns in the final scene to play a key role with Childs. He plays chess against his computer. Now, this chess configuration depicts a board that is out of step with the dialogue, as is often the case in movies and TV shows to chess players' annoyance when they watch it. According to the board we see, white should be in check and can only move the king to h3. MacReady should be the white player as he's in check, right? But his move is bishop to knight 4, and then the computer responds with knight to rook 3. So suddenly MacReady becomes a black player and the computer is white and just kind of ignores the check that it's in. And then now MacReady is white and moves king to rook 1 on the screen, but now the computer, black player now, checkmates him with rook to knight 6. So MacReady just says, screw this, and he pours his drink into the computer to fry it. Bitch. So, you know, at least he kind of redeems how all over the place the chess is here. But this is one of my favorite ever character introductions, as it shows how MacReady is a hero unafraid to engage with higher intelligence in a kind of chess match. And when facing defeat, he just throws whiskey at it. This is the perfect human to face against the threat we're about to face. Also, in a movie dominated by male voices, this one lone female voice in the film is voiced by John Carpenter's then wife, Adrienne Barbeau. So MacReady is the helicopter pilot of the group, which makes him both an outsider to the rest and a position they all respect, as he would be the only way any of them could ever get out of there. Like, notice how they all sleep in the bunks of the station, but MacReady sleeps alone in this weird little shack. Unlike most other survival movies that highlight the virtue of cooperation and teamwork as the route to survival, MacReady's rugged individualism and isolation makes him the human most fit to survive this threat, but it also makes him the most inhumane and inhuman, the antithesis of the communion the alien is trying to bring to this planet. And in a sense, MacReady is the kind of villain of this story. The root myth of John Carpenter's The Thing, a lone survivor survives alone. As the helicopter chases the dog, Carpenter shows some overturned barrels of Chevron gas, Chekhov's barrels, setting up the primary means MacReady will use to fight this alien. The Norwegians try to blow up the dog with grenades, and then the dog runs up to Bennings and jumps up on him. Bennings is the meteorologist of the group who does later become assimilated, but keen-eyed viewers have wondered if this was the first exposure among the Americans. I actually drew out an assimilation timeline of the 12 men in this facility, and the fact that there are 12 of them, 12 apostles at the aliens' communion, or 12 angry men of a jury pool. I mean, that can't be a coincidence, right? That's the size of a jury pool where one outsider convinces the other 11 that he's right. We learn later that assimilation can occur if even as much as one particle of the thing makes contact with your cells, which many have interpreted to include an exchange of saliva. We will be filling this in as we go because Carpenter structured this whodunit with an extremely precise timeline of evidence. But if you look closely here in this scene with Bennings, the dog does not actually make contact with Bennings' skin. Like, the tongue licks his glove, and I guess maybe saliva could have stayed on that glove and Bennings could have made contact with it later, but we do not see Bennings get infected here. The Norwegian scientist shouts at them, This actually translates to, get the hell out of here. That's not a dog. It's some sort of thing. It's imitating a dog. It isn't real. Get away, you idiots. But these words on screen are not shown in closed caption. They are not shown in subtitles. We just hear another language and have to kind of surmise what's going on. Now, if you speak Norwegian, yeah, you get a bit of a head start, but I would say no matter what language you speak, we totally get the context that something is dangerous about this dog. After Bennings gets shot in the leg, MacReady leaves him with the J&B whiskey bottle. So if Bennings was infected, MacReady would be too not long after sipping this, so just another clue that Bennings didn't get infected here. After Copper stitches Bennings up, in the background you can see Clark bandaging the dog in the back of the room there. Then we see Windows snapping at Blair.
I haven't been able to read shit in 2 weeks. I doubt if anybody's talked to anybody on this entire continent.
This establishes why the Norwegians weren't able to radio them to warn them. From the Thing's perspective, these humans are all siloed and disconnected, like a post-Tower of Babel society in need of a unifying force. Now, John Carpenter Carpenter had the cast go through several days of rehearsals, which is unusual for a film like this. These actors would discuss whether they would know when the thing had assimilated each of them, but it was decided that no, as the thing would be so effective at assimilation, everyone would just end up acting the same and give off no clues in their behavior. Therefore, the only clues we have as we watch it are things like the clothes people wearing, the logical moves they make throughout each day. Like any great game of Mafia or Werewolf, whether someone's acting just a bit weird is actually irrelevant when it comes down to it, because when people get paranoid, they just start doing irrational things. The only real evidence you have are the actual moves in the game, a bit of game theory extrapolated from that, and ultimately pure guesswork. So from the get-go, we established that Windows is irritable at Blair, Palmer is insubordinate to Gary's authority, the others are all looking down at Palmer as a burnout, Knowles is cracking jokes that it only takes a few minutes for cabin fever to turn a crew against each other. Meanwhile, since the thing is the dog, it's listening to all this and preying upon these natural divisions. But one character that the thing doesn't gain information on is the one who's outside. All these guys are inside. MacReady is the outsider out in the snow, deducing the mystery alone. That's why he's such a threat to this alien, because this alien is like, why isn't this one in the room with the rest of them? MacReady notes that the helicopter exploded so fast because it was loaded with 15 cans of kerosene, which is how MacReady later jumps to the conclusion that burning it is the best option. But MacReady's virtue is also a vice. He shows how he's not really a man of the world.
You really want to save those crazy Swedes, huh?
Norwegians.
Again, this is why he's such an antithesis to the alien. Think of the alien as kind of like a world government hive mind who wants to erase all these borders. The fact that MacReady would be the worst possible ambassador from one nation to another just shows how much this alien would hate this little piece of cancer. Knowles and Palmer watch the helicopter lift off, and then Carpenter and DP Dean Cundy drop the camera below the ping pong table. So Jed the Malamute, again, it's just the best actor in this movie. I mean, no offense to Kurt Russell, Wilford Brimley, Keith David, everyone's doing their best work in this movie, but damn, this dog never looks at the camera, and you just sense a higher intelligence from him as the dog watches the most threatening human to it, MacReady, leave the camp. Also important to note that Palmer in this moment, you'll notice under his jean jacket wears long johns, which will be an important clue for later. So Carpenter shows us Bennings leaving his room to tell Knowles to turn down the music, Stevie Wonder's Superstition, and I think we only see this so that we know which door Bennings comes out of in this hallway. So next, John Carpenter shows us the medical room, and in the shot, Dean Cundy lowers the camera closer to the floor so that we start to get a geographical layout of this station, which doors lead where, and we begin to see all this from a dog's height perspective. Carpenter shows us the empty rec room, and we see the ping pong table, and we notice that the dog is no longer beneath it, and then we are placed low to the floor in the hallway. The dog walks to the open door that Bennings just came out of, maybe to continue licking the human it tried to lick earlier, but then turns, and in the same shot, without cutting, the dog walks right to another open door where all we see is a shadow that turns the first assimilated. Now, based on the shape of the hair and the silhouette, this can only be one of three people: Windows, Palmer, or Norris. Windows later passes the blood test, so it's not him. According to Stuart Cohen, a producer on the film, in a blog that he wrote, the original intention was for this to be Palmer, but Carpenter and Cundy felt that the actor David Clennan's silhouette would just be too recognizable. So instead, they used stuntman Dick Warlock. Yes, that is his name. Awesome, I know. So they put in a stunt guy for this particular shot because the idea was that it could be any of them. Palmer and Norris are both revealed to have been infected later, but Palmer at one point shares a joint with Childs when they watch Let's Make a Deal, and Childs after that point passes a blood test. So Palmer must get assimilated well after this. It must be Norris here, assimilated by the dog in his dorm room. This silhouette has a huge bulge on the back of the neck that actually looks like the turtleneck we see Norris wearing in different scenes. Now, yes, this also means that the Norris who goes with MacReady to the Norwegian camp and to the dig site has been assimilated, but there are some clues pointing to that being the case. The smoldering ruins of the Norwegian camp were actually the same set as the American camp, repurposed after they blew it up for the film's climax. Principal production took place in Juneau, Alaska, followed by reshoots in Stewart, British Columbia, but the interior scenes were all on an LA soundstage that was chilled to 40 degrees Fahrenheit and humidified so that the actor's breath would show up on camera. But it's important for MacReady to be the one to tour this camp, as it chills MacReady into a fatalistic mindset that there's no escaping this. Not when the remains that look the most human is someone who has cut themselves and the blood froze immediately into blood sickles. But Doc has to be with him, because otherwise they never would have brought these remains back to the American camp, and the dog watches from the window as it sees the wrapped up remains on the side of the helicopter, because this is one part of the thing reuniting with another part of itself. Now, these twisted, gory remains are the first in this movie that we see of the practical effects created by Rob Bottin, who might have been the biggest character on the crew. He sketched concept art with a goal to make the thing never look the same twice. And indeed, as you watch this movie, every time mid-transformation we cut back to it, it looks completely different. He used rubber, melted plastic, gelatin, mayonnaise, KY jelly, lots of KY jelly. The effects budget started at $750,000 but doubled by the end of production. Bottin put everything into this film. He lived on the set, he worked 7 days a week for over a year, and he ended up getting hospitalized for exhaustion and ulcers. The legendary Stan Winston actually stepped in, helping out by making the dog thing, but Stan Winston refused to be credited and he gave all the credit to Bottin. But this fused face mid-assimilation, the 2011 prequel would actually show us the origin of, but again, for this analysis, we are staying within the 1982 film, and I kind of prefer thinking of Bottin's work as its own grotesque mystery. Palmer and Childs share a room watching Let's Make a Deal, which Palmer says he knows how it ends. Now, some point to this as a clue that Palmer must still be Palmer here because he remembers the episode, but it is also suggested that the thing assimilates your mind and all of its memories to create a perfect facsimile of the assimilated. Still, really between this and the joint sharing, I think Palmer and Childs are still human here at this point. But when the dog goes under the poker table and makes Bennings jump, Norris doesn't really care, which I think is a sign that he is assimilated. It's like your finger brushing your other finger. You don't care when one part of yourself touches another part of yourself, unless, you know, one part of yourself is, okay, whatever, let's move on. So Clark puts the dog in the kennel with the others and they all keep their distance as the dog thing lays in the center, preparing to assimilate. For any dog lover, this whole part of the movie is just the hardest thing to watch. Sound editor Colin C. Muat captured these sounds of dogs yelping by rounding up neighborhood dogs and stalking them around the house in a trench coat while tapping on windows and rattling doors. Now again, Stan Winston's team created this effect of the hulking dog thing, and it might be why the lighting here is a bit better on the mutating dog, because Bottin would always insist on less lighting for his creations to hide the artificiality. MacReady hears the screams and smashes a fire alarm with his beer can. He's always using booze to do things, this guy. John Carpenter and Kurt Russell discuss MacReady as a former Vietnam War helicopter pilot suffering PTSD from a dark mission that led to his alcoholism and his insomnia. Thus why he was awake to hear these dogs and reacts the way he does to the gore. It's also why he later says,
"I'm a real light sleeper, child."
Now, when everyone wakes up and comes out in the hallway, you can see 5 characters wearing long johns in this part of the movie: Palmer, Copper, Knowles, and Blair. MacReady earlier, this is an important clue. So when the dog thing has assimilated the other dogs, it reaches up 2 claws to break out of the wooden roof. This is also a critical detail because it means one piece of the thing is now out in the snow, running around the camp, unaccounted for. This is what the entity always does when it's surrounded and about to get smoked. It always breaks off a piece of itself to crawl away. And this unseen piece of the dog thing gets real busy in the movie. You just have to watch this knowing that it is out there somewhere at all times. But the original piece of the dog thing gets left behind in the kennel to freak out the guys. Childs comes in to torch it with a flamethrower. An orifice opens up into these petals with teeth inside. If you notice, these petals are actually made from dog tongues. 12 of them. 12 like the men in the group. The next morning, Blair conducts an autopsy, finding mutated forms of creatures not of this planet. The idea is that the creature would have come from countless other planets, absorbing life forms from them. So really, it would contain pieces of extraterrestrial life forms. And while explaining this to the others, Blair puts his pencil on his lips, which many have believed could have been a moment of infection, but Blair's actions after this are completely out of step with what the alien would do. However, Palmer and Norris here hang back from the others, so I think it's okay to assume that both of them might have been assimilated at this point. Blair questions Clark about where the dog was, how long he was alone with him, starting to piece together that all of them were exposed at some point. Now we call this contact tracing. This movie definitely hits differently after 2020. MacReady, Norris, and Gary head out to the dig site where the Norwegians found the spacecraft. Now this visual was actually a matte painted backdrop by Albert Whitlock, and the shots of the actors walking up to the hole were filmed on the Universal lot. MacReady asks,
Jesus, how long you figure this has been in the ice?
I'd say the ice it's buried in is 100,000 years old, at least.
So, if Norris was assimilated here, and that is a big if, because some people do watch this movie knowing for sure that Palmer must have been the first assimilated, but Norris was at some point too. I think it's possible that he was and would have said this about the 100,000 years. But why would he tell MacReady anything about the alien's origins? Well, in my view, the entity would be proud of its survival and would want to overwhelm the humans with knowledge that it predates all of human civilization. Like the Sumerians, the oldest civilization we know of, emerged 7,000 years ago. Why not just assimilate MacReady here? Well, you do have that third human in the background far away watching them, and we learn later,
it needs to be alone and in close proximity with the life form to be absorbed.
to try to assimilate MacReady during the flight would risk a fiery crash. Also, I don't think the Thing wants to assimilate MacReady. I think he views him as a disgusting yet worthy adversary, and I think that's why it bragged about it being 100,000 years old. So Palmer says,
they're falling out of the skies like flies. Government knows all about it, right, Mac? Chariots of the gods, man. They practically own South America. I mean, they taught the Incas everything they know.
Chariots of the Gods is a 1968 book by Erik von Däniken posing that ancient civilizations were influenced by aliens, a concept that inspired 2001: A Space Odyssey, Marvel's The Eternals, the Predator movie universe, the Alien franchise via Prometheus, and various goofy History Channel series like Ancient Aliens. But this line from Palmer is all an act, because Knowles rolls in to say,
"No, one of you disrespectful men been tossing his dirty drawers in the kitchen trash can, huh? But now I want my kitchen clean, all right?"
The Thing shreds clothes when it assimilates. So at this point, I'm pretty sure Palmer has been assimilated, based on the 2 shots we have seen of him and very similar long johns. The missing piece of the mutated dog that broke out of the roof either got him overnight or while MacReady and Norris were visiting the dig site. Palmer assimilated. So Blair runs some simulations on his computer to see how the alien's blood cell assimilates and imitates dog blood cells, extrapolating the likelihood of the camp's infection, followed by worldwide assimilation within 27,000 hours, which amounts to just over 3 years. Just to be clear, Blair would not be doing this if he were assimilated, so he is clear at this point. Bennings and Windows are ordered to move the infected remains. After Windows looks at it, it moves under the blanket, but they need the keys.
You got the keys?
Get them from Gary. I want to get some stuff out of here.
So the corpse oozes behind Bennings, and when Windows returns with the keys, he sees Bennings being assimilated. This tells us that Bennings wasn't assimilated prior. When the dog licked at him, it didn't hit his face. But listen closely as Windows reacts. We hear the keys hit the floor. They mix it so that it is super loud. They want everyone in the audience to hear this sound effect on the first watching. So later, when everyone argues about who would have had the keys to sabotage the blood bank, Windows dropped Gary's keys on the floor and anyone could have grabbed them. If anything, it exonerates Gary and Copper. So Windows runs out with Bennings' coat and they chase the Bennings thing into the snow where it releases this horrible wail. Bennings assimilated. This roar, according to John Carpenter, is the amalgamation of the screams of every creature it has assimilated thus far. So we hear dog, we hear human, and yeah, we hear some extraterrestrial life forms. MacReady kicks over the fuel barrel and torches Bennings' thing with the flare. As the others circle around the fire, look closely at them. Notice how one of them is in the bottom walking up after the others do. This is Palmer. He was the last to join them, probably because he was grabbing the keys from the floor. Now, the screenplay originally had Bennings dying by the Thing pulling him beneath the sheet of ice before resurfacing again and again in various stages of assimilation, but ultimately the sequence was too expensive. This exterior of the camp is lit with blue lights that Dean Cundy discovered from airport runways. The blue light on the snow made it look even colder and contrasted well with the orange flamethrowers and the magenta flares to create this dynamic visual. After torching all the remains, MacReady spots Blair sabotaging the helicopter, and then Blair destroys all the radio equipment. While at first it seems like he's losing it, he's actually the most sane of the group because he knows that he needs to prevent all of them from leaving or communicating for help so that the Thing won't be able to make it to civilized areas. But during the scene, there's something missing. One of them isn't there. Like any good whodunit, whether it's an Agatha Christie story or Clue or Scream or Knives Out or Glass Onion, the thing to watch for in every scene is who from the group is not there. It's really the best cinematic trick to pull in an audience. Just subtract one character from a group shot and then come back to it later to cast guilt. The only member of the group not in the scene is Palmer. This is most likely when the Palmer Thing sabotaged the blood. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. If you're spending hours at the gym trying to get your body ready for the stress of the holidays, you might want to think about putting the same work into getting your mind ready for the stress of the holidays. And to do that, you'll want to get help from a licensed therapist with BetterHelp. Starting therapy can be hard. The right therapist for you might not be in your area, and some people struggle with the face-to-face interaction of therapy. With BetterHelp, you can have your therapy sessions as a phone call, as a video chat, or even via messaging if you prefer that. Whatever's the most comfortable version of therapy for you. Just click the link in the description and answer a few questions about what you're looking for from therapy and what your preferences are. BetterHelp will then match you with a therapist from their network that's right for you. And if you don't really fit with that therapist, which is a common thing with therapy, you can easily switch to a new therapist for no additional cost without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. Mental health is quite the journey, but it is an important one. To start your journey towards better mental health, click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/deepdive to help support this deep dive channel and to get you 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. So they lock Blair in the tool shed, but notice that they leave him in this tan-colored coat. This could be an important clue for later. Dr. Copper recommends a blood serum test, and we see Gary giving him the keys. So after Windows dropped it, whoever used these keys to sabotage the blood, Palmer must have returned it to his side without any of them noticing. I assume Palmer was doing that when they were all moving Blair to the tool shed, because their focus would have been on Blair. So they find the spilled blood from the cooler, and throughout the scene, notice how Palmer hangs back, one headphone in his ear. He used to be real mouthy, always talking, but now he gets quiet, wants to blend in with the background. This middle section of the movie, though, does an amazing job distracting us with various red herrings. Like, we get Blair's outburst, we get Clark's closeness with the dogs, making him a suspect, Windows panicking and going for the guns. And because we, the viewers, are panicky humans, we are more attuned to loudness and panic than to silence and to subtlety. So when Commander Gary recognizes the doubt surrounding him, he tries to pass off leadership to Norris. Norris's reaction is really the smoking gun.
Norris, I can't see anybody objecting to you.
I'm sorry, fellas, but I'm not up to it.
Norris is assimilated, of course, but he doesn't want the spotlight. Meanwhile, look at the background of the shot. Palmer is also assimilated here, and he is staring daggers at what? The back of Fuchs's head. After Blair, who was a senior biologist, was taken off the board, the Thing's next biggest target would be the assistant biologist, Fuchs. It's also just interesting the way all of these men just instinctively know MacReady is the right one to be in charge. Not that their trust in him doesn't waver after this, but I think it comes down to his status as a stubborn loner who's just so human that they would know if something were off about him. Besides, they must know that if the helicopter pilot were assimilated, he would have fled to a civilized area by now. So after torching the blood bags, MacReady gives the speech.
If it takes us over, then it has no more enemies. Nobody left to kill it. And then it's one.
Then it's one, W-O-N. But it also works as a homophone, because at this point, the fully assimilated Thing would be one, O-N-E. Now, this speech was originally not in the screenplay. It was thrown in last minute to give the audience a fuller sense of the stakes. MacReady is the first to truly know the new rules of the game. Don't trust anyone. Piss everyone off if you have to, because that's exactly what the humans need to do now. They need to let go of their civilized instincts and turn into animals. Unfortunately, the humans' top suspects are Gary and Dr. Copper, because they thought that they were the only ones with the keys, and Clark because he's weird and hung out with the dogs too much. MacReady records a log that the storm has been blowing for 48 hours. So with his earlier line that the storm was 6 hours away, it has now been 54 hours since his big speech. We don't really get an explanation of this. We just get this one line to tell us they've been here for days staring at each other. But there's a really creepy detail here.
R.J. MacReady, helicopter pilot, U.S. Outpost number 31.
The door behind MacReady begins to close by itself in the shot. Now, maybe it's a goof. Maybe it's just supposed to be like MacReady's paranoia. Maybe a piece of the Thing is behind the door and opted not to assimilate MacReady in this moment. I don't know. I looked around online trying to find an explanation for this. I haven't found one. If you worked on this movie or know more about it than I do and could explain to me what happened with this door closing, let me know in the comments. So MacReady walks in behind Fuchs, who jumps and grabs a chemical flask. So the idea was this flask contained acid, and Fuchs was gonna burn anything that tried to attack him. Fuchs suggested they should prepare their own meals and only eat out of cans, because one particle alone is enough to infect someone. So then the lights go out and someone brushes past Fuchs in the dark.
Who's that?
Yes, remember that sound effect. So Fuchs finds shredded clothes outside with MacReady's name on them, and this is the last we see of Fuchs alive. MacReady tells Knowles to join him outside to look for Fuchs and tells Palmer to join Windows to look inside.
I ain't going with Windows. I ain't going with it. I'll go with Child.
Ah, this is Palmer Thing playing the game, casting doubt on the only sketchy suspect not currently tied up or missing, Windows. This was the jumpy guy who went for the guns. So MacReady and Windows and Knowles check in on Blair.
I'm not gonna harm anybody, and there's nothing wrong with me. And if there was, I'm all better now.
Yeah, there's something really unsettling about Blair here. Like, there's a noose hanging, he's eating out of cans. So how would he know that unless Fuchs had gotten to him? I mean, it's possible he came to Fuchs's same can realization himself. He's also a biologist. Maybe canned food is the only food they left him with. But either way, Windows finds Fuchs' burned remains, R.I.P. Fuchs. But since Fuchs's remains are still human, he was not assimilated. So what happened here? Well, there's a few possibilities. Fuchs found MacReady's torn clothes, we know that. So maybe he thought MacReady was assimilated, became despondent that the best of them was taken, and took his own life. But I don't think that's what happened. At this point, Blair was almost certainly assimilated. It's been 54 hours, and the Blair Thing would have needed time to dig under its cabin and start building a new ship. So I think shortly after the storm started, around 48 hours ago, human Blair was about to hang himself, but was assimilated by the Thing. It could have been Palmer Thing, it could have been Norris Thing, or it could have been that loose mutated dog thing from the kennel. Whatever part of it was, it took on a new form of MacReady. And then at that point, the Thing assimilates Blair, shredding out of MacReady's clothes and using those clothes to try to frame MacReady. This is what Blair Thing was doing when it was snooping around the camp in the darkness. It was trying to cast suspicion on MacReady. I think the Thing's goal with the side quest was to get the other unassimilated humans to turn against MacReady and for them to kill him. I believe the Thing does not want want to have to assimilate MacReady into his own body mass, because the Thing views MacReady as cancerous and just wants MacReady off of the chessboard. So it's Blair Thing who plants MacReady's clothes in the snow, and then Fuchs finds them, but I think Fuchs is smart and knows what game is being played. So rather than telling the others, Fuchs just tries to bury these clothes, tries to hide them so the others can't find them. And at that point, Blair Thing comes up on Fuchs, tries to assimilate him, but then Fuchs used his flare, I think, to set himself on fire so that he can't be assimilated. And yeah, suicide is a crazy thing to just assume someone did, but I think he does this because he's smart and he's brave and he wanted to leave one final bit of clarity behind for MacReady and anyone else who had tried to deduce things from this and play that social deduction game. Because think about it, if Fuchs dies a human, then MacReady and the others will know that the assimilated must have been among the other survivors. They won't just see a missing body and think, oh, well, Fuchs was it. We're good. We're all good, right? By killing himself, Fuchs says, no, the assimilated is still among you. Now, the original idea for Fuchs's death was for him to be found by Childs and Palmer in a greenhouse, impaled on the wall with a shovel. Also deleted was the moment with MacReady and Knowles checking out his shack, and they would have found his sex doll, and they would have shown Knowles finding more of his torn clothes stuffed in his furnace. In this case, it was likely removed to keep it more of a mystery what exactly really happened in the shack. So for a few minutes, we, the viewer, are kind of stuck in the paranoia with the other guys as they wonder if MacReady has actually been assimilated. Palmer and Norris are especially eager to torch MacReady, but really this is the Thing playing the game to play to Child's paranoia. But then MacReady breaks into the control room and he holds his flare over dynamite. And not only does this scare them off, it actually is an effective form of verification for himself. Because if MacReady were assimilated in this moment, there would be no way he would threaten to blow all of them up, because the Thing is more obsessed with self-preservation than MacReady would be. Fuchs proved that suicide is actually a tactically advantageous move to make, something that the Thing would never do. So Norris has a heart attack, which is an interesting thing to think about. Was it the Thing playing into his human host's pre-existing blood pressure, or was it a diversionary tactic against MacReady that would take some of the control out of MacReady's hands? I assume it was the latter, because MacReady, arguably, when he threatens suicide, is at his most powerful. So the Thing strategically has to expose part of itself, Norris, and that is what happens here. They untie Doc Hopper to give Norris chest compressions, and while MacReady is growling at everyone in the foreground, we can see Clark palming the scalpel. Carpenter and Cundy actually reflect a glare off of the scalpel, and we think the action is gonna happen here with MacReady, Clark, and the scalpel, but no, literally no one sees it coming when this happens.
Clear.
Now, here on YouTube, we cannot show the chompy chomp on the arms, but you know what happens. To accomplish the bite, they actually replaced the actor playing Doc, Richard Dysart, with a stand-in who was a double amputee from an industrial accident, and they made fake lower arms out of wax and rubber with fake blood that could gush out when it was bitten off. That's why in the wide shot of Doc pulling back screaming, it doesn't actually look like his face. It's a guy wearing a mask of his face. So Copper dies by bleeding out, and he dies human, so no assimilation. Now, yes, they created a prosthetic model of Norris's chest, and they used his facial likeness on the mutated monster face that stalks up to the ceiling. And one detail that always creeps me out, that wormy neck actually has Norris's fuzzy hair covering it all the way down. Ugh. As MacReady torches this monstrosity, we get another insane effect of Norris's neck on the gurney stretching out as the camera glides to follow it. This was an extremely complicated shot, requiring two puppeteers beneath the table and an operator at the base of the table to slide the neck up out of the body, and of course the camera operator. Bottin said that at the last second, Carpenter was like, hey, we need to add flames to the base of the shot for continuity to match MacReady's flamethrower, as the only reason the Thing is bisecting like this is to get away from fire. So when they added the flames, all the fumes that had been filling the room from the prop materials used to create the prop body caused it to burst into flames. They were barely able to salvage this prop. Now, when Norris's head sinks to the floor, they did use melted plastic and microwave bubblegum for the neck, and this factoid was brought up in season 1 of Stranger Things.
You know what that is?
What?
Melted plastic and microwave bubblegum.
Even though Stranger Things season 1 takes place in November 1982 and The Thing wasn't available for home media yet, and it's unlikely fans of this movie would even know this production detail just 4.5 months after the movie came out. Well, you know, whatever. Norris Thing's severed head sprouts crab legs and eye stalks. And to me, this right here is a Cecil B. DeMille shot, letting us know that we're not watching a B horror movie. This is not a guy in a suit. This is just a crazy realistic looking puppet, and it's terrifying. Before our eyes, a practical head turns into an alien crab. There's no VFX. It just happens, and it almost crawls away without them noticing.
You gotta be kidding.
Now, yes, Palmer is assimilated here, but he notices Window seeing this thing first, and he just has to play the part of being equally horrified. Because while the Thing hoped part of itself could get away, he knows at the end of the day, the Norris chunk of himself was a sacrificial pawn. So Clark lunges with the scalpel, but MacReady shoots him dead. Later, when they test his blood, he was human too. So between Copper and Clark, that's two central suspects that were cleared as human. So first-time watchers at this point literally have no idea who it is. Really, we're just going by who seems the grouchiest right now. So MacReady explains what he's gonna do next.
We're gonna draw a little bit of everybody's blood. We're gonna find out who's the thing.
And right as he says the thing, the camera stops on who? Palmer. As MacReady prepares a test, behind him is this poster that says, "They aren't labeled, chum," which is a VD awareness poster, again underlying this possible interpretation of the thing as a metaphor for the AIDS outbreak in the 80s. Also, the pinball machine in this room is called Heat Wave. MacReady tests each of their blood with a heated copper wire. And from the moment the testing began, Dean Cundy has said that in the close-ups of each character, you can see a light source reflected in their eyes for every character except Palmer. So yes, MacReady, human. Windows, human. Gary, human. Childs, human. Knowles, human. But Palmer, nope, just a black void in those eyes. When MacReady tests the blood for Doc and Clark, Knowles turns back to stare at their corpses. Since he's the closest to them, he's most worried that they're gonna start to transform. But I gotta hand it to Keith David. He does an amazing job in the scene, shifting his eyes slowly to follow Windows, and he just repeatedly talks shit. So we just assume it's gonna be him. So we're really not expecting it when MacReady moves on to Palmer, and Palmer just looks down and kind of smirks, as if to say, well, the game is up. And Palmer's blood reacts. So to achieve this shot, they held the dish in a fake hand. It was a prosthetic hand held in front of Kurt Russell's face so that they could hide the blood puppet that would jump out. But just so that we wouldn't see this hand as fake, they also used this fake hand in all the previous times MacReady was holding a blood dish. And also, right before that blood jumps, you can see Kurt Russell flinching a bit. Really, the creepiest thing about Palmer's transformation is the initial wide shot and the sound mixing. You can see Knowles screaming, but they left out the sound of it. MacReady! It kind of comes off like he's trying to scream, but no sound is coming out. Instead, we just hear his screaming coming in later, and we don't really know where the screaming is coming from. So Palmer transforms into a bloody mess. And I know I've gone through this analysis assuming that Norris was the first infected. It's totally valid if you want to say Palmer was the first infected, because that was the intent before they brought in the stunt actor to replace him. The movie leaves it ambiguous. I just think there's enough clues to point to Norris or Palmer, and other things happen in the movie where Palmer probably was clear. But Palmer now transforms into a bloody mess. He smashes through the floorboards, he flies to the ceiling, his head splits open, bites Windows' head, thrashes him around, and MacReady finally gets the flamethrower working again and burns Palmer thing and blows it up with dynamite. So while you could argue it's not necessarily evolutionarily efficient for the thing to make such a bloody mess when it assimilates and transforms, here we see the advantage of doing so. When you assimilate, it freaks your victims out and stuns them into paralysis. So this attack has left Windows infected and assimilated, so MacReady has to use Windows' own flamethrower on him, RIP Windows. And I love the efficient editing for the rest of the blood test. Like we see a wire in Knowles' blood, Knowles is okay, so Knowles reacts, whew. And then cut to, Knowles is immediately at MacReady's side testing Childs' blood. And Childs yells to be cut loose away from Gary. Cut to, Gary's now by himself on the couch. And since this is also comedic, the test just ends with this great punchline.
I know you gentlemen have been through a lot, but when you find the time, I'd rather not spend the rest of this winter tied to this couch!
So now we are down to our final 5, since Blair is still out there somewhere technically alive, and we enter the end game of this chess match. Now we have to watch this section of the movie very, very carefully. We see the shot where Childs is watching from the window. What color coat is he wearing here? Blue. Beside him, another blue coat, nearly identical to the one he's wearing. Remember that. MacReady, Gary, and Knowles go to check on Blair, and they find the door open, even though it was bolted from the outside. And they find an underground tunnel that Blair Thing must have dug through the ice, leading to a cavern where he had been building a spaceship using parts from a helicopter and the radio room. You can actually see pieces of the radio room lockers repurposed as fuselage. This tells us that through this tunnel network, Blair Thing had access to several parts of the building. Now from this bunker, Carpenter then cuts back inside the main base camp, and we get this interesting tracking shot that shows us the steps leading down to the basement where the generator is, and then tilts up to the room where Childs was previously just standing. And we know these steps lead down to the generator room because that's where MacReady later leads them. But back in this lookout room, to the right, we see a storage room. And when we push out of the lookout room, we see the door leading to the outside is wide open. And then on the right, another door back to that storage room is also left open, and Childs is missing. Also missing, that blue coat that was hanging beside him in the previous shot. So why is all this important? Carpenter just showed us exactly where Blair went and exactly how Childs was assimilated. The basement door must lead to the generator room where Blair Thing's tunnel had led to, because we see Blair Thing down there later. Blair Thing could have come up these steps, walked into the storage room on the right, and then come through that second storage room door on the right and snuck up directly behind Childs, whose back was to that door, and then assimilated Childs from behind. That would have shredded his clothes, and then the Childs Thing could have put on that second blue coat. Because right after this, Knowles looks back outside, back at the camp, and sees Childs running out in the snow, and he's wearing a blue coat. So Childs runs out in the storm. Later, his excuse is that he saw Blair and chased after him, but why wouldn't a super cautious child like Childs yell over to them to ask one of them to help him? Wouldn't he know at this point that going off anywhere alone is how you get suspected? Among the opening lines of Peter Watt's short story, The Things, are, "I am being Childs guarding the main entrance," so he definitely thought Childs was assimilated. But really, I think the likeliest time that Childs could have been assimilated would have been after that, right before he ran outside, unless another piece of the thing was out there in the storm waiting for any of them to run out into the fog. So the generator powers down, meaning that Blair Thing must have gone down to the basement after assimilating Childs. MacReady lets him know the truth. No one's getting out alive. So they begin to blow up the camp with these Molotov cocktails. It's implied that all of these J&B bottles that MacReady's been emptying throughout the movie now serve a purpose, like what M. Night Shyamalan would later do with Signs. All these drinking glasses laying around everywhere now serve a purpose. They're empty, so they can be filled with fuel to turn into Molotov cocktails. We see how the generator room has already begun to freeze over from the dropping temperatures. The final three split up to set charges, and Gary gets ambushed. That sound effect! Remember I told you to remember that sound effect? It's the same sound effect that we heard earlier with Fuchs when the fuse went out.
Who's that?
So that almost certainly was Blair earlier that passed Fuchs. Also notice that Blair here is not wearing his tan coat, just his long johns and his suspenders. Now this is the only time in the movie we see the beginnings of an assimilation without any blood or screaming. This is how the Thing really prefers to do it, when he's not being seen. So Commander Gary assimilated. It's really just the creepiest shot from Null's perspective, seeing Gary dragged away with rubbery appendage from his face. This is actually the last we see of Knowles in the movie, but they did storyboard out Knowles' death sequence that would have included Knowles getting grabbed by the Blair Thing, and then the alien smashing up out of the floorboards at MacReady, and Knowles' head and torso mid-assimilation would moan, "Help me!" before small tentacles would pop out and a large tentacle would come out of his mouth. So Knowles, like Gary, assimilated into this overall mess of a Blair Thing. MacReady lights up some dynamite and the floorboards roll up. Now to get this, they actually set up railroad tracks and pulled a heavy ball under them along a cable so that these tracks would pop up in this succession. This is the largest form we've seen of the alien, smashing up from the ground. In its anatomy, you can make out a canine form from one of the kennel dogs that assimilated, and up on top of its head, on the left side, half of Blair's balding head. MacReady screams, "Yeah, you too!" Over this wide shot of this building exploding, you can hear a characteristic scream. The scream was added at the behest of the studio, who wanted a more definitive ending that implied the creature had been killed. Childs appears next to MacReady.
You the only one who made it?
Not the only one.
Now, I know I said that Childs was wearing Blair's tan coat here instead of his blue one, but I will admit, it's kind of hard to tell since it's been caked in snow and the only light source is warm firelight. They exchange the final words of the movie.
What do we do?
Why don't we just wait here for a little while, see what happens?
So, I did go through the clues at the beginning of this analysis, pointing to Childs being assimilated. No, we cannot see his breath as clearly, but really that's just due to the lighting. Also, there's no glimmer in Childs' eyes, but that doesn't matter. That rule only applied to the blood test scene. But MacReady offers him a drink. The music and the laugh. I think those are the most important things to focus on. It is true that MacReady had been making Molotov cocktails out of these bottles, and some believe that he might have given Childs a bottle of gasoline to test him, or maybe it was just testing to see if Childs would be okay sharing saliva, throwing booze at the adversary the way he did the chess wizard computer. But I don't know. When MacReady was just walking out there, I think he thought he was at the end of his life, and he was about to take a sip of it. He didn't know Childs was walking up to him. I think it probably contains whiskey, because wouldn't an assimilation at least have a sense of taste enough to know that fuel fluid would be uningestible? And was Childs even privy to the whole idea of sharing saliva being a risk? I think it's a fun theory that the bottle contains fuel, but I just don't think that's the case. Now, the 2011 prequel established a rule that the alien cannot recreate inorganic materials like piercings or fillings, and Childs here does have his earring, but again, that was not a rule for the 1982 film, so we will set it aside. It's worth noting that original endings, including one in which both men had turned into the Thing, and in the spring they would be rescued by a helicopter and greet the pilots with, "Hey, which way to a hot meal?" Carpenter shot yet another alternate ending where MacReady is rescued and given a blood test where he's proven human. There was also another ending that omitted Childs entirely, another ending that would have shown the camp exploding but the dog running off into the tundra. Ultimately, they just went back to this ending with MacReady and Childs together freezing to death in a final heroic act. But we do know that one of these men is the Thing, because on November 23rd, 2012, Carpenter confirmed on Twitter, quote, "Yes, one of them was the Thing." The 2002 tie-in game reveals that MacReady survives and is picked up by a rescue team while Childs freezes to death, and Carpenter has stated that game is canon for what it's worth. In 2016, Kurt Russell told the Huffington Post that the whole point of the movie was to leave the audience in a state of paranoia and ambiguity and not definitively answer the question. But ultimately, I believe there is more than enough evidence to point to Childs having been assimilated, the most damning of which was his choice to run out into the storm alone and to tell no one, and of course the missing jacket hanging from the side. But on a thematic level, if only one of these men was the Thing, then there is no way it is MacReady. In the eyes of the Thing, MacReady was not worth assimilating. MacReady is a cancer. MacReady would make the Thing's shared consciousness and shared body a poisoned well. Because MacReady's paranoia elevated him to the hero status among the humans, but his refusal to trust his fellow man doomed him to a cold stalemate with Childs. He surrendered his humanity, so he has no hope for any kind of communion. The lone survivor survives alone. Peter Watts' short story The Things ends as follows. What should we do, I wonder? I cannot escape into the future, not knowing what I know now. How could I leave them like this? Why don't we just wait here a while, MacReady suggests. See what happens. I can do so much more than that. It won't be easy. They won't understand. Tortured, incomplete, they're not able to understand. Offered the greater whole, they see the loss of the lesser. Offered communion, they see only extinction. I must be careful. I must use this newfound ability to hide. Other things will come here eventually, and it doesn't matter whether they find the living or the dead. What matters is that they find something like themselves to take back home. So I will keep up appearances. I will work behind the scenes. I will save them from the inside, or the unimaginable loneliness will never end. Those poor savage things will never embrace salvation. I will have to rape it into them. Oof. So why does MacReady chuckle? Because he finally understands that he's the monster of this story. Like the ending of Richard Matheson's I Am Legend, the vampire hunter becomes the hunted in a post-humanity society. He becomes the legend. He becomes the freak who no longer fits into the grand design of civilization. MacReady is the Thing. I love this movie. Happy Halloween. And support us by grabbing a Survive the Dive shirt at nerdriot.shop. Please subscribe to this channel, turn notifications on, and share this channel and its videos with everyone you know. Follow me at Erik Voss. Thanks for watching. And to my divers of the deep, let's just wait here a while, see what happens.